So Drippay just moved to Evil Geniuses. It's the first ever international move from a Rocket League player, and there was a player from OCE. So this is obviously massive for Drippay, but it's also got big implications for OCE and even some implications for NA and EU as well, as they now have the opportunity to work in some other talent pools. And this happened kind of at the beginning of this year, end of last year, but it was obviously months in the making. Drippay knew well in advance, and I also think Evil Geniuses weren't actually the only team. If I recall, even G2 were kind of looking at Drippay, and it kind of is a massive testament to just how good Drippay is that there were multiple international teams looking at him and thinking, we should bring him over to our team and improve it. And even when it comes to him, OC has only been in 4 seasons. He has been in every single one. He's actually become now one of the most experienced players in the world, despite being from Oceania. He's had some of the best placements, considering, I guess, overall placements. And not many people have come within the top four of a world championship before. So, of all the things and all the people, Drippay has absolutely deserved this position. The fact that he got that privilege is just well done. Especially 2018, he was unequivocally the best player in OCE throughout the entire time. And what he's doing, he's moving to Seattle. They're actually going into a gaming house with the EG team. He's going to be living with Classics and I think Fireworks. Don't know exactly on that one. And Corrupted G will be flying in and out to the gaming house, sometimes playing from his home in Canada and sometimes playing from the Evil Geniuses house. And I think it's kind of a big set of offices that they actually are going to be practicing in, and there'll be other EG teams from other esports titles in there too. Obviously, that's really cool. No one in OCE has that, so instantly a big thing. But he's also going to be. He also gets a really good salary there, and when we talk about why Drippay made this decision to move across, that's kind of a massive, massive part of that. The salary here in OCE, not a single person is on what you would call a salary that you could live off. And it was just, I guess, the fact that a lot of these players still live at home and don't pay rent, and a few of them pay board, but they don't have to pay that much. That was sort of what makes it viable for players here at the very, very tippity top to compete and play full time as such. You saw Chiefs last year; they earned over 100,000 Australian dollars, and Tainted Minds / now Icon earned I think roughly $75,000. So that on top of a salary, and you don't have to pay rent and bills and all this stuff. That does make it viable. But there's a huge difference between that and actually having a full-time salary, which Drippay will now be on. And they actually flew him across as well. Hang on. They flew him across as well. They took him to San Francisco and housed him there for a while. And I'm not sure if he's moved into Seattle yet or not, but that is also part of it. So even now, he's still not paying rent, not paying bills, and he's getting a full-time salary. It's a big increase. But I don't think for Drippay it's about the money, even though that's nice, as much as it is about the experience. Because now he gets to play on a North American team and actually get experience against other North American teams, even European teams. Scrim every week. Ranked in America is way deeper and more robust than the OCE rank system. If he's playing ranked in OCE, he gets paired with a Champ 2 player to play against 2 Champ 3 players, and he still wins all of those and carries those players. But that you don't really get a very fulfilling experience from that. You don't get a lot of improvement. So for him, it's the start of a career with a full-time salary. It's the chance to really improve, and considering how well he did in a under-moneyed and under-skilled region with a shallower player pool, simply because of the level of population, I expect him to really strive in North America. In terms of whether it was a good move, I'm not really sure. Like, in terms of everything for Drippay, brilliant. But he is going from a team that is almost certainly, and if he'd still been on that team, would 100% qualify for Worlds. And now he's on Evil Geniuses, who are a team who very, very potentially could not make it to the World Championship. So that is... It's not even an upgrade. EG lost to Chiefs in the last 2 seasons, at World Season 6 and Season 5. And technically at E-League, Chiefs had a better placement in the bracket, but they didn't verse each other. So for me, it's undoubtable that Chiefs are the better team. So to actually make that decision for to move to EG, obviously Drippay is outweighing the fact that very clearly he's moving to a not as good team. But I think all the positives for Drippay outweigh those negatives. And yeah, I really do look forward to seeing how he plays. For the Chiefs and for OCE, it is a massive, massive loss. I mean, let's talk about the Chiefs just straight up. They lost the best player in the region. He was really consistent last year. He was an important part of pretty much every series throughout league play. Even in the second half where they weren't performing at their best because they just brought in Kami. And I guess we hadn't really, from anyone, maybe even internationally, seen that level of consistency. Drippay had bad games, but he never had a bad series. I guess the only exception was the Gfinity Elite Series Season 1 semi-finals, where they lost to Avant Gaming, where it really felt like all 3 players from the Chiefs had a bad series. But for Drippay, you'd often see him have a really slow start, struggle in the first 2 games, and then really kick it off from game 3, and maybe even just win the series from there. And you could count on Drippay doing that pretty much every single series. They've now lost that, and not only that, Team Icon, they did not want to split up whatsoever. They felt like really strong. They had some wins against the Chiefs the previous season, and I think they really felt like, as a team, they could do, more even than the Chiefs, or they can really make it. So all of a sudden, that sort of other side of the top teams in OCE was locked off to the Chiefs, and so now the Chiefs have to look even lower in the experience pool, right? So now you're kind of thinking, okay, the only the only few players that have been to an RLCS, if you want someone experienced, is like Jules, Bango, Monte Connor, who's retired. So some options that for the Chiefs, I don't think they'd ever even look at. For Zen, that is a player who I think they really felt had really high potential, a lot of good mechanics there, the ability to get to the top level, but he's going to be a long-term investment for the Chiefs. He hasn't got experience. We know that he's got some, at least at Gfinity and league play and finals, he's had some nerves issues, so he's going to have to work on that. There's a lot of way that he needs to go to actually reach the level of Drippay. And, I mean, you can't expect anyone in the region to play at the level of Drippay. The person for the Chiefs that has to step up to be at the level of Drippay needs to be Torsos or Kami, preferably both, because they're the 2 really experienced players. One has been to 4 Worlds, one has been to 3. So they need to start bringing their level up and be the Drippays of the Chiefs and allow Zen to kind of not pull his full weight, at least for the first few months. And that's tough, you know. Like, obviously, if they just had Drippay, they were there. You know, they're gone. They're already booked their ticket to the World Championship. They're ready to go. This isn't public knowledge as well, but when it came to Dreamhack Leipzig, it was the players' decision not to go. And I know that the Chiefs were going to make an announcement about this, but, you know, may as well be here. But the players, I think after WSOE, just didn't feel quite ready with Zen as a three-man unit. They needed a little bit more work, and I think after spending the last month practicing with Zen and taking down the gauntlet over Icon last week, if Dreamhack Leipzig was this week, they would be there. They'd be ready to compete. But you know, traveling for 24 to 30 hours for the sake of potentially playing for, you know, 2 to 4 matches, that, you know, you're not getting your money's worth and your time's worth as players, and so you know, in the future they're going to most likely go to the rest of the Dreamhacks and hopefully perform well and really show that the Chiefs have still got it. When it comes to outside of the Chiefs, the rest of OCE, I think it also has a massive impact for Drippay, and it almost saddens me that we're seeing a player that's the best player of the region get removed. We're already the region with only 20 million Australian population, maybe 30 million total population between Australia and New Zealand. The rest of the countries are around, and I don't know any players that are playing from Fiji or whatever on that high ping to try and make it to RLCS, so it's really hard to count those. I think there's a good Indonesian scene starting to pop up as well, but that's actually like a country with something like 200 million people, but I think there's like 30, 40 players who are pretty casual as far as the competitive level goes. So 30 million is the sort of player pool that's available, and to lose your best player from that pool is just so difficult. All of a sudden, even just moving from like 12 good players to 11 has a massive impact. Now you need to see some filtering up from below, but it's just plain and simple. If you've got a bell curve over a massive population is just going to have more people at the top, and then the more people at the very top, more competition, better improvement from each of the teams, and so it's just simply going to lower the level of skill of the Oceanic region. No matter what, you can't really recover instantly from that, and that kind of sucks. And not only that, it has a real immediate effect. So, I mean, we saw it this season. There's only one team that has remained the same from last season. That is Icon. And there was one other team, that was the X Ground Zero Gaming roster. I think they were now Sky Infinity, and they didn't qualify for the top 8. And they kind of broke up and came back together as well. So only one team remained. Every other team completely disbanded, and have, you know, I would say this is probably the biggest roster shuffle. The second biggest roster shuffle was Season 5. And the two reasons for that, well, the reason for that in both of those seasons is that someone from the top team, or from a top team, the Chiefs, left. So as soon as you see Jake get replaced by Kami from the second team, Tainted Minds, or you see Drippay get replaced by Zen, it causes cascade of movement as well. I think it was really obvious in Season 5. There weren't going to be a lot of changes, but the moment that the first change, the Chiefs, came up, that was what made Tainted Minds split apart. They were going to stay together, but they split up. CJ teamed up with Shady and Express, who are still the same team, Darksided, so a little bit of continuity. There we go. There's some continuity there, but that wasn't even the intended team. It was going to be Jake on that team, and then Express brought in Shady a bit later than that. And the same here, Zen and Jules were going to stick together, but then Zen, say that 10 times fast, gets pulled over as well. Now Order's broken up, and it causes another cascade of changes. So the more times this happens, the more times someone from the top team gets removed, the more it shuffles. That looks really bad for the region. If you're a team organization, a great example is Order Esports. Order Esports picks up a top team. The team that comes first in the Gfinity Elite Series, they immediately split up. They are now on Tainted Minds, and all of a sudden they need to find a new team. They build a roster around Dumbo. They play throughout the second season of the year. Well, Dumbo leaves, they split up, and now they have to reform a team around Jules. And if that happens every single season, that sucks for Order. They can't build an identity around their players. They have to spend money every single season to try and contract new players or buy out somebody else's contract, figure out what they're going to do, and it doesn't look great for them, it doesn't look great for their sponsors, and that makes Rocket League not a great idea. And you can kind of compare that to the top of NA and EU. Sure, they might change their rosters. They might have, EU shuffle. That was the whole thing of this season, of Season 7 that's coming up. The big EU shuffle. Except none of the teams are disbanded. They're all together as 2 out of 3 because of RLRS and the continuity rules and how that affects the rosters, and they have to keep 2 out of 3 or they lose their RLCS spot for a year, so they're not going to do that. So there's those small changes, but the core identity of the team is still there, and so there's a lot more room for organizations, for viewers to really stick with the team. Like if you're a viewer watching OCE, how confusing no one knows anything about the OCE teams outside of Chiefs and Tainted Mind / Icon. You know why? Because how can you bloody follow the Oceanic region if they change their rosters every single season? Who was the third place roster last season? It was Order. But the previous season it was Darksider. But they're completely different teams now. So so Order a really good team. And it's just the fact that they've managed to, I guess, play well this season. They're still in the definite top 4, but they're a completely different team. So even then, people might still be thinking, okay, what team's Dumbo on? Because that's like one of the players that has been the most consistently in the top 4, and maybe they can get behind some players, but there's no real team identities until they stick together. And a big thing that this move that Drippay does is for the other players in the region who aren't earning these big salaries, who can't play in many tournaments. It's realistically 2 tournaments in a year that you can guarantee yourself, if you're good enough, that is the RLCS season, the first season of RLCS and the second season of RLCS. Because if you want to get into Gfinity Elite Series, you have to get picked up by a team. You can't qualify into it. So you have less control over that. There's 2 seasons a year. When you're in America and in Europe, you get many more seasons to really prove yourself. But now those teams or those players are like, okay, if I really want to make a living from this, I need to go overseas, and that's a real possibility now. Drippay has opened a potential floodgates, and it creates this environment of unease and unhappiness for the players who are like, okay, well, we're playing in OCE just to prove a point. There is a plus side to that too, though, in that those players get to... There's a lot of motivation in being like, okay, now this is a possibility. And this is a big point that Drippay made in his interviews when he moved over to NA. He wants to make OCE proud. If he does really well overseas, then there's a very distinct possibility that more teams will pick up Oceanic players, and all of a sudden you might see more OCE players. I think a dream for the Chiefs Esports Club is at the end of this season, I could imagine, they pick up Kami or Torsos and bring them over, replace Classics or Corrupted G, and all of a sudden, it's now an Oceanic roster that is playing in NA. That would be really exciting for me, because all of a sudden I'm not thinking, okay, there's one OCE player, it's still a North American team. It would now be an Oceanic team with a North American player on it, and I'd love to watch that, even if it still hurts the Oceanic Rocket League community and everything it kind of stands for. And it also, despite all that, I think there's been a lot more motivation in the kind of 3rd to 8th place teams. There's a lot more of that, there's a lot less of that unobtainable status. Before last season, Tainted Minds and Chiefs, it just felt like there was no way that they were not going to take the world spot. Well, now there's an opening. There's a gap in Chiefs' armor. Icon potentially beatable on a given day. So now a lot of those teams can have a lot more motivation to put in that practice and try and take them down. So there are some positive aspects as well, not just to Drippay and the Oceanic sort of exposure and respect that we get, but also there is some more motivation now for the teams and players, and that has been a problem when there has been those fewer tournaments and lesser prize money and lesser qualification spots. I know that players like Dumbo and Cyrix have dropped out because of the lack of motivation, and I think that is something that can add an injection of motivation into the region. I think overall, despite the negative effects it's going to have here locally, it is an amazing thing for Rocket League. It's awesome to see Drippay make it. I love Drippay. He's a great guy as well. For EG, it is a really good move. When you lost Chicago, you lost a firepower player. Drippay is that firepower player who can really have a very similar effect as Drippay, but I think that Drippay is going to be more important than Chicago was. They do say in their interviews that this is a team that can win championships, and even though I doubt that on ability of Classics and Corrupted G, I do think that Drippay is going to have far more of an impact, because he's going to bring that experience and really teach them a lot and really find a play style for Evil Geniuses. I think he's going to be able to work with Fireworks a lot on improving the team and making it more cohesive, improving the mechanics of the players as well. I think he's going to have a massive impact on that team. It's a great pickup for Evil Geniuses. I also wonder maybe, I was thinking if it was Chicago, Drippay, and one of Corrupted G or Classics, I could imagine that team very easily winning a world championship. That's a really, really strong-looking, scary-looking team. And it's only the fact that Chicago left for G2 that is not possible, and I don't think they would have picked up Drippay if Chicago didn't leave anyway, but it's nice to think about. Anyway, congratulations to Drippay. I'm glad to see him there, and I hope that the OC scene can continue to grow, and maybe try as best it can to fill that position and that big hole that Drippay's left.